we did a lot of different things. We worked with individual teachers. We did activities where we brought students to Texas Tech and had like massive writing workshops. We just did all kinds of different things until we kind of honed in on working with a specific leader at the school who could kind of help us make things happen at a bigger level. And so our story is really one of this kind of evolution across time and how this great idea, this altruistic idea of serving a community need kind of evolved into something that was much more co-constructed and mutually beneficial.
What's interesting too is it doesn't matter that no matter where you start the partnership, it's rhizomatic in that the students ultimately become the benefactors.
We really are so honored to be the recipients of this award. It's a humbling experience. It's been quite a learning journey for all of us. And but really what I wanted to kind of start with today in our talk was talking about where it came from and then ultimately how it moved to meeting the needs of the community. And so we first had to kind of understand what those community needs were. To take a step back for just a moment, our project grew out of the East Lubbock Promised Neighborhood Grant, but we were a little bit late to that grant. That grant was a multifaceted grant that was providing all kinds of educational support and community services for students who were attending schools in East Lubbock. It was a partnership with the Lubbock Independent School District. And at some point in that grant, the leadership in the school district said, we really need help with literacy. And so the dean, our former dean, Scott Ridley, whose picture we've also included on this slide, kind of as a homage to the East Lubbock Promised Neighborhood Grant. He pulled together all of the literacy faculty and had us meet with leadership in LISD and talk kind of about our skill sets and what they needed. And what grew out of that conversation was this idea of developing literacy champions. And that was, interestingly, their name for our work. But anyway, you know, it stuck, and we weren't quite sure how everybody would take that title, but here we are, going on our sixth year of doing this work, and we're still literacy champions. So initially, it started out with several schools in LISD, but eventually it kind of morphed into just serving one high school. And so for the last 4 years now, we have been, as a group, at a high school. And the need that was identified, both initially and then what has carried throughout the grant and throughout our work beyond the grant, because the grant ended and then we've continued to do this work and engage in this partnership, was really focused around writing and supporting the needs of students, and now specifically adolescent students, with writing development. So one thing that we really kind of wanted to emphasize about this process is that we didn't start out as an engaged scholarship project. We started out, as part of a grant. We had to kind of figure out what our roles were going to be in this process. We had to negotiate a lot of what our work would look like. And we had things like an MOU, we had partnership agreements, we had lots of guidelines, but that's kind of the formal picture. But the informal picture really dealt with relationship building and kind of figuring out at the campus level what it is that we were going to do as literacy champions. And so we did a lot of different things. We worked with individual teachers. We did activities where we brought students to Texas Tech and had like massive writing workshops. We just did all kinds of different things until we kind of honed in on working with a specific leader at the school who could kind of help us make things happen at a bigger level. And we had to kind of negotiate that work. And so ultimately it evolved into engaged scholarship. And so our story is really one of this kind of evolution across time and how this great idea this altruistic idea of serving a community need kind of evolved into something that was much more co-constructed and mutually beneficial. So let's go on to the next slide.
So we have, there is a need across the nation for meaningful writing instruction. And I don't want to get into the details, but when you compare reading and writing, reading, it can be somewhat of a passive process. When you're enjoying a good book, you're just kind of savoring it, and it comes at you, and you're enjoying it. But when you're writing, it seems a little bit more cognitively demanding, because it's a representation of your thinking. So a lot of teachers just don't know how to teach writing, and it has throughout the years, from elementary all the way to high school, across the country, there has been a fairly low levels of writing proficiency. And according to one particular nationwide assessment, which is commonly referred to the NAEP, we have about a quarter of 8th and 12th grade students in the nation who can who are designated as being able to write proficiently. And a lot of that has to do with our high stakes testing culture. This has been a change in Texas, but previously they have been only testing writing at the 4th grade, the 7th grade, and the 9th and 10th grade levels. So traditionally, teachers that are not a part of those grades don't even engage in writing hardly at all. And so then when the kids get to those grades, it's very difficult for them to catch up, so to speak. So when these kids come into 9th and 10th grades, most of them have a very low level of writing proficiency, and it's even worse in schools that are considered struggling. So and in this sense, especially in those schools that are considered struggling, they revert to a lot of time teaching to the test practices. And when writing is tested, it's only certain forms of writing that are tested. So it's what we call expository writing. It's creating an argument, basing that argument with a lot of evidence. And so there's just, teachers are at times really not considering more authentic practices, because they just don't have the time, because they're irrelevant to raising test scores. And when we come in as literacy researchers and we're like, you know, how about you introduce this practice, or how about you introduce that practice and engage children in writing, they think of us as being out of touch with their immediate needs. And so that really required us to create a shift of thinking about what our roles are in schools. Traditionally, literacy researchers provide a service or engage in outreach. So we do research on a specific practice, and we provide professional development for teachers, and then we'd like to see whether that particular practice had an effect in the classroom. However, research study after research study pretty much says that a teacher will engage in that practice for a while, and then they'll drop it because they need to see that it's relevant to them in terms of, is it going to help my students pass the state assessment? And a lot of times they just come back to us and tell us, well, we don't have time to do that. And so we had to stop being the people engaging in the professional development and help our partners, you know, facilitate the change that they needed towards more authentic writing instruction. And Elizabeth, if you can go to the next slide.
So I mentioned a minute ago about relationship building and how important that was, and just how pivotal that was to all of our work. And it truly was that development of a relationship that allowed us to move into engaged scholarship, where we were doing things like co-constructing a research design. And, you know, quite literally, you can watch the progress of our work in that respect by looking at the types of research questions we were asking year after year, and the point when those questions started to be co-constructed and how they became more powerful. And the first time I sat down with our partner to talk about designing a study together and articulating a research question, the instructional coach was a little bit taken aback, but she was able to still contribute. And she was taken aback from the sense that no one has ever asked her to do that sort of thing before. But she was very much able to contribute with things like, you shouldn't collect this kind of data. That's not going to be very useful to you because of X, Y, and Z, and that sort of thing. The next time we sat down together to negotiate a research question, she was much more involved in articulating and specifying aspects of that research question. And then most recently, she anticipated the development of a research question and started thinking about it at the end of the academic year of, you know, what we really ought to be asking next year is this. And so that role of that relationship and how we're truly co-constructing a research design, it's so distilled through that process of just looking at the ways that we articulated research questions. So from there, knowledge started to become democratically derived. As we were developing new knowledge about writing practices, it was very much grounded in what was happening in that school and what the needs of the school were. And so it turned into something that was transformative. And we'll talk a little bit about, you know, the positive outcome of our work here in a minute. But the goals with engaged scholarship are that it is transformative, that it's transformative for all the stakeholders. So in this case, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about leadership at the school, we're talking about students, we're talking about our students who have participated in this project over the years. We're talking about ourselves as researchers. We're talking about people whom we share this scholarship arising from this work out in the world and in our field. So it really has turned into a multi-perspectival investigation where we're looking at a lot of different perspectives and using tools like reflexivity to really dig in and look at what's happening from different perspectives, including our own, which is just as important as everybody else's. And of course, multiple stakeholders. And the thing that I think is so powerful about our work is that it's sustained. So we have this great grant, as I mentioned at the very beginning. When that funding ended, we all made an agreement that we were going to continue to do the work that was most meaningful to us. And then we sought ways to support it financially. And then I've already mentioned about the research evolving every year. But it is important to notice that, or for me to note that although our research evolved, that kind of fundamental question around writing has not changed. And looking at things like how embedded professional development in a school setting supports the writing development of 9th and 10th grade students who are deemed to be quote unquote underperforming. And I will tell you, as Julie was just mentioning a minute ago, this is of national concern. So we have this little microcosm that we're working with, but across the nation, everybody is trying to solve this problem. There are dozens of underperforming schools and students who are struggling with literacy skills in those high schools. So as we are discovering and learning things through this process and publishing about it, we're providing a service to a community that's broader than just who we think of and work with on a regular basis. Okay, Elizabeth, you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you.
So how we met our partners' needs was, at first, we had a lot of memorandums of understanding, partnership agreements, proposed a research design, which served to outline roles and responsibilities and what goes into that joint decision making. And the things that we've already talked a little bit about is every year we co-constructed research questions together. So I think the main difference between traditional literacy outreach and our version of engaged scholarship is we came to the instructional coach and actually asked her, what would you like to know more about? What would you like for all of us to study together? And it's through her desires that the research questions have evolved over time. And through that required negotiating data collection and procedures each year. So I'm going to ask Elizabeth to talk about some of the data collection procedures that we've done so far.
Sure. So Whitney and I have collected a lot of data over the last, well, a little over a year for me, multiple years for Whitney. And a lot of this data that we've collected has included informal and formal writing samples collected from the students themselves. And she and I have examined all stages of the writing process, from the prompt analysis to planning and brainstorming to the multiple parts of the final draft, grammar mechanics, punctuation, et cetera, et cetera. We also collected field notes from classroom observations and bi-monthly professional development sessions, interviews with teachers and the instructional coach at the end of the year, and also questionnaires were given twice a year to the teachers and to the instructional coach. And we utilized open, axial, and selective coding in analysis of each category.
Okay, thank you. So essentially our roles and responsibilities were the instructional coach was the one to lead professional development. And initially we were like, we'll offer you the professional development. And she was like, kind of like, no, like, because she knew what her teachers needed. She knew what the environment was like, the high stakes testing. And so that at first, because traditionally that's what we do as literacy researchers, we provide the professional development, and that was kind of a change for us. But our change, our responsibilities in this sense was to be the researchers, to collect the data, just like Elizabeth said. And we presented that data, so twice a year, in the middle of the year and at the end of the year. And it was, I think, one of the keys to the engaged scholarship, because our instructional coach definitely took notes every time we presented data and adjusted her professional development, and in spite of the data that we presented to them. So for example, we said things like, oh, the strategies that you're implementing, the kids are definitely getting it. We're seeing it in their worksheets. We're seeing it in some of the smaller assignments, but we weren't seeing it in their independent or natural writing. And so then we had to brainstorm and figure out, how are they going to transfer those strategies that they learned and actually incorporate it into their writing. And so we talked a lot about, what does it mean to purposefully write, when you're engaging in writing, and what is it that actually writers do, and how these strategies help to improve a writing piece. And then through that, that's where these transformations came. So, and we also co-planned and started sharing in the development of manuscripts with our instructional coach, and engaged in conference presentations with our instructional coach and teachers. So Elizabeth, next page.
And one thing I want to point out in all of these slides, as you're seeing the images, they're actually from our site. So that last one you might have recognized Julie Smith and myself, and two of our research assistants are pictured there, Whitney Beach, who is with us today but hasn't spoken yet, and then another research assistant who was working with us at that time. So we've had some research assistants kind of come and go. Whitney Beach has been the one with us the longest, and now Elizabeth is on her second year as a new doctoral student. And so that's kind of our little tight team at this point. But anyway, school impacts. So, the things that we have observed over time, and part of the reason that the partnership has persisted is because there have been improvements brought about through our partnership. And this was something that just the other day we were speaking with the instructional coach over as we're preparing for a presentation at the Literacy Research Association annual conference, and quizzing her again about, you know, the role of engaged scholarship and what that's meant at her school. And of course, we can point to things like the skills of writing, the writing skills of students in 9th and 10th grade have improved. We have all kinds of data around that, around just the volume of writing, their ability to structure an essay, their control over grammar and mechanics and word choice and just all sorts of things, having a sense of beginning, middle, and end. And we've definitely just seen a lot of improvement that way. But also, one of the things we've been measuring is teacher knowledge around evidence-based writing pedagogy. And so at some point, our lens kind of shifted a little bit more to teachers to look at what they were thinking about with writing and kind of developing their own knowledge. And we work very closely with teachers. We're talking a lot about the instructional coach as like our partner, but we work very closely with a team of 5 teachers, and we're in their classrooms, we're talking with them a lot. And so they're definitely contributing to this process as well. And I think it's kind of hard to capture some of that as we're sitting around a conference table and the contributions that they've made to the research. It's just fascinating to watch. So definitely we have created a culture of writing in the school. And 2 of the teachers whom we've worked with the last 3 years have moved into leadership positions. So one of the things that has happened is that we've been part of a process of cultivating transformative teacher leaders. And that's something that we're really excited about in some of the work that we're publishing over. Our literacy coach has received a lot of acknowledgement for our partnership through the district, having people come in and observe what's happening. And again, national presentations, local presentations. She and I got up and spoke to the Rotary Club at 7 o'clock in the morning about a year and a half ago on a very foggy, dark morning. But so there's a great deal of commitment and that is born out of the impact. And then the last thing, the school improved in their ranking from an improvement required campus to a B rating. And some of that was because of their partnership with Texas Tech University. Okay, Elizabeth, let's go to the next slide, please. So both Julie and I are going to speak to this slide just a little bit, and I'm watching the time, so I'm going to kind of speed up a little bit in what I have to say. But personally, let me just say that being involved in this project has changed the way I see myself as a researcher completely. And I always say that I always thought of myself as a researcher who was responsive to the needs of schools and the community and the field. But this is kind of a different level. This isn't me sitting in my office and thinking about what do kids need to know about writing, and then going out to the world and finding a school or a classroom that would allow me to experiment essentially with what I think they need to know about writing and how to teach writing to students. This is a totally different approach where we go to a school and say, what do you need help with around writing? And then they tell us, and then we offer some ideas, and we come to a shared understanding. And it's just shaped so much of the way that I think about scholarship from that standpoint. So it really has kind of changed my research agenda and opened my eyes to a brand new methodology for research. In terms of my teaching, I have recently became a service learning fellow and through the TLPDC, which is wonderful. And I have been engaged in working on more service learning projects with my students because of that. And we have also started a class on engaged scholarship for our graduate students. I didn't design the class, but I've taught it for 3 semesters in a row. So I feel like I've kind of helped shape it a little bit from that standpoint. And so it is absolutely shaping the way we're thinking about our curriculum at the university. And then with our students, what we're seeing things are, you know, we started with something called an Apex project in the college. Again, when Scott Ridley was the dean, that we were requiring all students to have this type of experience out in the schools doing applied research that was engaged with a partner. And so we have many students who went through that process. And again, it kind of changed their worldview. And it's led to dissertations. So Whitney Beach, one of our students who's with us today, is doing her dissertation around this engaged scholarship project. And so the last thing I'll say is, as I'm teaching these classes on engaged scholarship, I'm noticing the disposition of students, of our doctoral students, are changing dramatically in how they think about what kind of research they want to do, who they want to be as a researcher. So the ethos around research has just changed dramatically in the College of Ed, and specifically in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction from these efforts.
So the one thing I just want to say as I think engaged scholarship has been incredibly important for our teaching, because in the field of education, it's not just important to tell our students about theory, but they look to us as in, is this really going to work in the classroom? How do you know if you don't have experience in the classroom? How do you know that this is actually going to work? And so I've been able to say, well, when I was in the classroom, because at first I worked at the elementary school. So I'm like, well, when I was in the classroom and I saw this particular kid and he had this particular behavior, and when I tried this particular practice with him, then I saw this reaction. And so when I'm able to have these conversations with my master's students who are teachers, they're like, oh, they give me a sense of, you know, credibility. They see me as not just the expert on theory, but also that having that practical experience. And so I think that was really important. And in terms of research and innovation, we think that this is where literacy research needs to go. And so we've been grappling with this issue of, you know, we've had these great practices in literacy for 40 years, but the question is always, why aren't the teachers implementing these practices? And we blame the high stakes testing culture and environment for that. But in a sense, teachers have found a way through high stakes testing culture and also enacting these best practices to help raise those test scores. But other teachers, they look at you and are like, you know, that PD is fine and great, but I can't do that. I don't have the time. And so it's this way of, it's a slow process, but it's also an innovative process. And we think this might finally be the way of emphasizing sustained and impactful change for our schools. And so I'll let Elizabeth and Whitney talk about, you know, how engaged scholarship has affected them.
It really has had a really big impact on the two of us, especially in our classes. Whitney and I get together and speak all the time. A lot of that multi-level mentoring that I'll refer back to later. But we've definitely learned that with engaged scholarship, it definitely needs to involve a lot more mutual trust and sharing of power, and just the fluidity of engaged scholarship in general. And it really, and we were even talking about this a little while ago, it allows us to understand it better the more that we use it and the more that we see it, especially in this partnership.
From my point of view, I will say that I feel as if I have had a master class. I have become an apprentice in what it is to sit there and get a, you know, to be a fly on the wall, to actively get a safe space in which to experience the negotiation that takes place between the stakeholders that are involved in forming these long-term sustainable partnerships. That is something that must be worked at, and it must be worked at constantly. You know, that relationship development that Dr. Wesley spoke of, that Dr. Smith spoke of, you know, that begins on day one, and that begins not just with the classroom teacher, and the students that are in the classroom, that begins with the teachers that you meet in the hallway. And in the beginning, when Dr. Leslie was speaking to all of the members of the community that were involved in this grant as it evolved, there were many, many stakeholders involved and lots of different personalities that were involved and lots of power negotiations that had to take place. And as a student, getting to be there and getting the, I'm profoundly grateful for the opportunity that I was given to be there, to get to see that. And as far as a researcher, you know, to get to see the innovation that's taking place, because, you know, in so many times I feel as if, and you all can correct me, you know, I don't easily get my feelings hurt these days, but so many times money is thrown at a problem. And instead, what I've gotten to see happen here, which is so tremendous, is that systems that have been in place have been revolutionized by the partnership. It's the same tools that schools have had there. What's been the revolutionary part has been the outreach. It has been the engagement. It has been the building of those relationships that has made the revolution take place there. I don't know what you feel like, but what's interesting too is it doesn't matter that no matter where you start the partnership, it's rhizomatic in that the students ultimately become the benefactors, as then do the partners, every one of the partners. And so the rhizomatic nature of the revolution and it is amazing to me still. So I don't know that I addressed the slide as you might have liked, and if there's any questions, please ask. But to me, that's been some of the most exciting things that have happened to me as somebody that has been in every level classroom from grade 6 on up through university status, and I've been a student and a teacher.
So I'll just quickly go over this. Our scholarly products have been 3 peer refereed articles. We have multiple articles in revision. We have 1 book chapter. Approximately between Dr. Leslie and the students and I, we have about 15 presentations to local, regional, and national peer reviews. Once the funding had ended for ELPN, we needed to search for some forms of internal funding to pay teachers stipends for their professional development. And so we've accrued $16,500 of internal funding. And we also, based on our work of Engaged Scholarship, have just received a $98,000 National Endowment for the Humanities grant. We were extending our work to the history teachers at Estacado, and we're trying to use the History Day Lab to enhance college readiness, and we want to see how when they engage in authentic history research, how does their writing improve? Okay, so next slide, please. So both of you are, you've pretty much addressed all of these anyways, right? Elizabeth, we can probably move on.
I think we've done a lot. The one thing that I do really feel that I would like to just keep stressing, and I know that you and Dr. Leslie probably get very sick and tired of me saying it, just everything that we've learned, especially me within the last year and couple of months, how to take more representative field observation notes, interview participants, analyze data, organize that data thanks to those awesome spreadsheets. And we know now what career paths and everything we want to take. Whitney and I were even just talking this morning a little bit about how down the road, we really want to, in some way, shape, or form, replicate what we do at whatever, hopefully, tier 1 university that we work at. I mean, we definitely have those goals now. So was there anything you wanted to add?
It really makes a difference in having an apprenticeship, that master class, learning about research designs, getting a chance to, conduct this in dissertations, and to learn about who you are as a researcher in this. That engaged scholarship, the opportunity for that enrichment that comes with the reflexivity, that engagement, the outreach there, all that engaged scholarship offers, I think really gives a new insight into what it is to be a 21st century researcher, and what can emerge, the mentoring opportunities, things that come here vertically, horizontally, and that if you are involved in authentic engaged scholarship, that is extremely important, and the change that you can be the part of enacting. I just think that it's very exciting.
So I'll go quickly through some of our challenges, but I think as an assistant professor who's going up for tenure this year, living in the world of publish or perish, it was a little difficult at first, probably my first couple of years, because engaging in this research took a lot of time to fully develop our relationship and our partnership. And building that trust is continuously ongoing. And I think it was when we'd finally established a research design, and then we'd have stakeholders come in and out. Like, the first school I was working at, the principal left, and then they had an interim principal come in, and he didn't understand my role at the school. And so it just, the research that I was going along with, I couldn't use anymore. So it was very difficult at first trying to figure out what was it that I could publish from the work that I was doing. So that's why maintaining flexibility is so key. Yeah, next slide.
All right, so again, quickly, lessons learned, so many lessons, but to try to encapsulate this into some quick takeaways, that again, we cannot emphasize the importance of longevity and consistency. And I don't know if we've talked about clear communication, but that's also just essential. Getting to a place where you can really communicate kind of honestly with your partner is really critical. So one of the things that's happened with our project is that we survived the quarantine. We're in the thick of data collection last spring when that hit. So I had to go in and modify our IRP, but more importantly, we had to work with our partners. And at one point early on, we got an email saying, give us some grace, and we completely understood, because we were still asking for student writing samples, and we didn't know that they were having difficulty just getting students to log on, So once we had that kind of communication, it helped everything for them to know it's fine. We're not in a big rush. Those writing samples are going to be there, and and once we just had that talk, everything was fine. So it's also really important to define your roles and to set a tone of respect. So in both ways, to not jump to conclusions about, oh, this is all terrible here, they don't know what they're doing, what they said was offensive to me, but to really just sort of, again, allow that this space of grace so that a relationship can blossom. We've also learned that it's important to work with key people. So you've got to find the people who can kind of make things happen. And when a new instructional coach was hired, who was very transformative in her thinking, she had a vision for what she wanted to have happen. And she looked at us and said, yeah, no, I want to work with you. She could see the possibilities for a relationship instead of feeling overwhelmed with, oh, these are just more people I have to deal with. And so that was really helpful, to find that person who had that personality and that, that disposition to work with. Being flexible, you have to be flexible with everything, the way you're designing your research, when and how often you go into the field, everything you have to be very flexible with to make this work. And some of it is just, again, just showing up. Just being consistent and showing up gives you so many opportunities, because what your partners learn is that you really care, that you're really invested. You're not just there to grab some data and then leave. And we also came to learn about the power of reflexivity and how important that is, especially for looking at kind of inequities in power relationships and processing some of that. And that reflexivity gave us a place to kind of work through any misgivings we had and build theory and to kind of self-interrogate, which was just so important to move beyond. And maybe most of all, to develop some ethical judgment, to have that space to kind of take a step back, take a deep breath, and write and analyze what we were writing about, and start to see things through a bigger lens, to see our partner's perspective, things like that. Okay, so next slide, just very quickly. So our future plans are to continue to work with our partners in developing research. We were so excited at the end of last year when we were doing our end of year presentation that the teachers in this project were so invested in what we are doing. They want us to be in their classrooms. They want to know what we see that they don't see about their students' work. And they've all come around to seeing themselves as literacy champions. So no longer are we kind of these external people with this weird title that somebody gave us, but now it's theirs. It's theirs. And so they see themselves as literacy champions. They call their professional development Literacy Champion PD. In fact, they've shortened it to Lit Champs. We're the Lit Champs. So they've taken ownership over this. And that shift is just, it's so symbolic of what's happened with the dynamics in our work together. So we are doing conference presentations, we are publishing together, and we have submitted a grant for funding, not with this campus, but with other campuses in the same school district, but it's grown out of this partnership. So Julie mentioned the NEH grant that we were awarded this past year. And that also grew out of this partnership because they trusted us to come in and do this work. And so the work will continue. And that's, I guess, a good note to end on. If we go to the very last slide, it's just questions. What questions do you have that you'd like to ask any of us?
It's a question from Roman Taraban. Is anyone doing research on reading?
In this, are you asking about in this setting or just in general in our scholarship? One thing I can tell you in this setting, while you're responding to that question, we have looked at student attitude surveys around reading to compare them to writing and to kind of look at, we do a beginning and end of year survey with students on that to look at their attitudes around reading and writing and kind of compare their attitudes in those aspects to each other.
One of my initial research interests has always been looking at adolescent reading and how their talk about books helps them to understand the world around them. And so I'd hope definitely sometime I'll be able to use or utilize our relationship with LISD and engage in some more of that kind of research in the future.
Yes, and one of the reasons we've kind of leaned toward writing in this setting is because they do a lot of work on reading. And in fact, going way back to the beginning of the project with the grant, the literacy leadership from central office said, we know how to teach reading. We've got all kinds of reading programs everywhere on all of our campuses. We could use maybe some funding for some things like benchmark assessment through guided reading, for instance. But what we don't do is writing. We need a lot of help with writing. So that's been a big part of the reason we kind of focused on writing. But we're happy to do anything with reading as well, as Dr. Smith said. Any other questions?
I would love to thank you, Melanie, Julie, Elizabeth, and also Whitney for sharing your incredible work. I mean, you are a stellar example of an engaged engaged team, and the project exemplifies engaged scholarship at its finest, because I appreciate you also highlighting how it has provided rewards, not just for your partners in the community, but for yourself, as you have maybe changed your scholarship, the type of research you do. It has opened up funding opportunities. It has sparked interest and engagement among your doctoral students. So that's very exciting to see. So thank you so much again for participating.